Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dustin Hurst. I serve as the Vice President of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, the sponsor for Capital Clarity and the sponsor for today's event. Before we get started, I want to thank all of you for being here, taking time out of your busy schedules. I can promise you that it will be worth it and that today is a special program, thanks to a very special young woman. Before we get started, I want to turn the time over to Sue Gaston for a brief prayer. We'd like to start with prayer, and then I'll tell you how things will go today.
Thank you, Lord. Let's pray. Father, we invite your presence here today. We acknowledge you, Lord, that you're the creator. And God, I pray for open hearts. I pray over Chloe, that she would feel a peace here. We validate her, Lord. We thank you for her. And Father, we ask your angels around us today, and that our hearts would be open to what you would have us to do, to walk out your will in our lives today. We give you the honor and glory in Jesus' name.
Thank you, Sue. Before I introduce Chloe, let me first express my gratitude to everybody who made this possible. First of all, obviously, the Idaho Freedom Foundation donors who paid the expenses to get Chloe here. The security team, both Capital Security, MAV Event Security, and ISP, to make sure that we could keep her safe while she's delivering her remarks today. The staff of the Idaho Freedom Foundation who have worked tirelessly overnight sometimes this week to figure stuff out and to make sure logistics worked well. And again, thank you to all of you for showing up. I've been thinking about this introduction for a long time, ever since we booked this last November. Sometimes in politics, we spend our time thinking about how we can punk the other side, how we can make the liberals cry big liberal tears, right? And win and defund them and crush them and stuff like that. And we all play politics and then we go home and we call it a day. This is bigger than that. This is a moral issue where we cannot lose because we are fighting for the lives and souls of our kids. And this is bigger than politics. Thank you so much for being here today. Chloe gave a wonderful speech last night that really, it touched me as a father of 3 kids. It touched me, and I know that it touched many people who were there in Caldwell with us. I personally just would hope that, most of the people I would assume are receptive to this message. But if you're not, and you just want to listen and learn, open your hearts, open your souls, and listen to a young woman who has turned her trauma into a brave campaign to save the lives of children. With that, I am so honored and thankful to introduce Chloe Cole.
Hello. I'm Chloe Cole, and I am a detransitioner from the Central Valley of California. I'm 18 years old, and I am biologically female, but at the age of 12, I started to socially transition into a male identity, starting with cutting my hair shorter and wearing more clothing from the boys section, and then eventually going on to the medical route at 13, starting with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. And just after my sophomore year, getting a mastectomy at 15. I stopped transitioning just a year after at 16 years old. Before I transitioned, I was a fairly normal girl. Both my parents were in the picture, and I'm the youngest of 5 kids. And I'm also on the spectrum, so I did struggle a little bit in school, socially, um, and with my grades and things like organization. And I started puberty fairly early. I was no older than about 8 or 9, and so I had to deal with these changes rapidly occurring in my body at a pretty young age, and also the comments that other kids my age and the adults would make on it. And I grew very, very quickly, very conscious of my body. And I also started using social media at quite a young age, which really didn't help. It reinforced these negative feelings about my body image, about being a woman, and a lot of what I would hear from other girls and women about growing up from a girl and then eventually living in as a woman was just very negative in nature. Um, a lot of it was centered around things like periods and the hardships of female puberty and potentially getting pregnant, going through childbirth, and aging and menopause, all spoken about almost always in a very negative light. And I would often hear things from other girls, phrases like, "Why did God make me into a girl? Why can't I just live life so much easier as a man?" And I started to feel the same way. On social media, I learned that there was a way out of being a woman. Um, I started seeing a lot of content made by other people around my age who were teenagers and young adults who identified as trans or were otherwise LGBT. And I noticed that a lot of them were very similar to me in a lot of ways. They were often on the nerdy side, a little socially awkward, and they often felt like they didn't fit in. A lot of them were not particularly close to their families or those around them. But as time went on and they struggled and started to become more accepted by their friends and their families and started to gather a community amongst themselves where it seemed like they really were accepted and loved. This was something that really spoke to me as a kid who didn't have a whole lot of friends. And after a while of seeing this content, naturally I started to wonder, well, who am I? What is my place in this world? And am I really even a girl? And I started to question my gender identity, switching between a few labels before over time I decided that I was in fact a boy. And it made sense to me because I felt like I didn't look like the other girls, I didn't act like the other girls, I didn't think like the other girls, and I connected a lot more with the boys, so surely I had been one of them. And after a while, I decided to tell this to some of my friends at school, some of my friends online, and then eventually my parents. And at first, my parents were very cautious of this. They knew absolutely nothing about this, and they felt like they weren't really qualified due to their lack of knowledge and experience on this to make a definitive decision on this. And so they sought the help of a therapist. And their expectation was that these feelings of me, of their daughter, in fact, being a boy, would be explored, that they would get to the bottom of this, and that it would be resolved, but this never happened. The therapist only affirmed my identity. It was never questioned as to why I felt more like a boy than a girl. And I wasn't allowed to just be, I wasn't allowed to just grow without any intervention. After I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria, I started expressing to my gender specialist that I had a desire to start the medical process because from the research that I had done and what I had been told by the medical professionals, it really was the only way forward to treating dysphoria. I thought For any parent, this would be extremely difficult to hear about your own child. And they felt that this was the only way forward. And so, just about half a year after my diagnosis, my puberty was blocked. And a month after that, I was put on testosterone at just 13 years old. Me and my parents were given the impression that this would make me happier, more whole, and healthier. But quite the opposite happened. I was diagnosed with depression and social anxiety in my sophomore year. So bad that they decided it would be best to medicate me for this as well. Shortly after that, I started expressing a desire to get my breasts removed. And this is due in part to having used a device called a binder for a few years. And a binder is it's a piece of clothing that is in the shape of a tank top, but there's compression fabric in the chest area for the purpose of hiding breasts of women or males with gynecomastia. And I didn't start using one at the very beginning of my transition. It wasn't until I had an incident with a boy in 8th grade shortly after I started transitioning who had actually assaulted me in classroom. That was when I felt like I had to hide this part of me from the world. I didn't want anybody to know that this is a part of me. And so every time I went out to school, outside the house, whenever we had guests over, whenever I would go on a run or exercise or swim, I would wear this thing for anywhere between 8 to 13 hours a day. And it was not comfortable. Supposedly it fit me pretty well, and I didn't experience any back pain or chest pain or rib pains from it like other girls I knew who did the same had. But the damage it did to me over time was less obvious. It actually caused my ribs to flare outward because it compressed my breast into my ribcage so hard. But I also would wear this thing not only everywhere I go, but I live in the middle of California where on some days it gets up to 115 degrees during the summer. And I wanted to be free of it. I genuinely believed myself to be a boy, just like any other boy at that age. And I wanted my body to reflect that. And so I had a consultation with a surgeon and went through the surgery just after my sophomore year when I was 15. And at first, when I woke up from the surgery, it was an outpatient surgery, so I was sent home pretty much as soon as the medication wore off, and I was free to leave. But when I woke up and I was conscious enough to know what just happened, I was satisfied. I was happy. I felt like it was a huge milestone in my transition that I passed. And when I went home and I posted about it and I talked to my friends about it, I don't think I, before that point, had ever been celebrated more in my life by anybody. And there is a period of about a week after the surgery when I couldn't bathe just for the sake of taking care of the surgical site. But after that period passed, I had to start bathing again. And every night I would have to undress and redo my dressings and look down at this area, these wounds on my chest, and face the reality of things. It hadn't really hit me yet that I had lost 2 whole organs of my body. It was just the sight of what was left of it was, for lack of better words, traumatizing. And then a few months after my surgery, I started to realize I really miss some things about being a girl. I missed wearing skirts. I missed wearing dresses. I missed wearing makeup. And even though these are little things, I felt trapped in not being able to do them, at least not in a way that was socially acceptable. I thought that I would live life easier as a boy, that I was destined to be. But I learned the hard way that this was not the case. And really, the grass is greener on the other side. I learned that when you're a male, socially, things are a bit more difficult. There are certain expectations that for many are difficult to meet, and there's not a lot of room for expressing yourself, especially emotionally, or to talk about your own hardships. I found that a lot of my relationships with my friends became more shallow and less emotionally fulfilling. I started to realize that I really wasn't fit for this role that I'd put myself in. But it wasn't until during my junior year when I was taking a psychology class that the reality of things really started to come together. In this class, I learned not only just about general human psychology, but about parenting and child development. And before this point in time, sometimes I would wonder, like, do I want kids as an adult? But I never had really thought about it in depth. During my consultations for hormones, other medications, and for the surgery, I had been asked things like, are you aware that this may affect your ability to have children in the future? Or that you will lose your ability to breastfeed if you go through this surgery? And at the time, I thought I understood what this meant, but no kid does. I hadn't really understood the importance of filling that role as a parent and of caring for your child, and how breastfeeding and being physically affectionate with your child strengthens the bond between you and your child, and how that goes on to affect a child's later development and their cognition, their emotional regulation, and their socialization. I knew about none of this when I was making these decisions. It was after that class that I decided I just couldn't keep lying to myself. I couldn't keep living like that. No matter what I did, I could never be a boy, and I always would be a woman. And so I stopped taking the testosterone. I went off it entirely cold turkey because I had no guidance from any medical professionals, not even the ones who got me into this position. And I had to figure out the medical side of things. I still am. And I had to navigate the social hardships that would occur after that, because after going off the testosterone, I lost about 25 pounds just in a matter of 2 months. I had no appetite, and I was very sickly. And I was worried that I might not have been able to make it. It was very difficult to regulate myself emotionally with such a hormonal imbalance in my body. And it affected my relationships. I lost a lot of friends before and during my senior year of high school, partly due to this, but also because some of them were transgender, some of them identified as non-binary or called themselves allies to the LGBT. And just hearing about my experience was offensive to them. I was often told by other transgender people that I should have known better, that I was told exactly what would happen to me, and that I should feel stupid, and that I didn't deserve parents who loved me enough to allow me to transition. And they told me to shut up, because in talking about my experience, about my regret, and the ways that transition harmed me, I was harming the whole community. And so I gave in. I didn't want to cause discomfort or any harm to the community of people that I thought had loved me. And I didn't want to keep being treated this way. So I stayed silent, but not for long. At the same time, I started researching detransition and transition regret. And I also started speaking to community people who were in a situation quite like mine, in that they had transitioned socially or medically, and they either regretted it or were physically harmed by it. And their stories were quite similar to mine. And there were a lot of them in these communities. I found out that I was being lied to, not only by my doctors, but also by this community of people who I thought were like me and supported me. And that there are many more people in my situation. And that was when I knew I can't stop speaking up. There are a lot more people in this situation, especially a lot more kids, but not all of them have a voice. And somebody needs to speak up. And I decided to take it upon myself. And I hope that in doing so, that I could bring more light to the situation, what is really going on, and also encourage other people to do the same thing. To this day, it's been about a year and a half, if not a little bit longer, after stopping testosterone. The surgery was almost 3 years ago. And from the blockers, the surgery, and the cross-sex hormones, there's been damage done to my body. The blockers, while I was on them, had put me in a state of what was essentially artificial menopause. And so I was experiencing side effects such as emotionally, I felt very dull, and I was also experiencing hot flashes very, very intensely. And this would occur with itching all over my body, and this would occur very sporadically. I had no way of predicting when it would happen, but I would have to. I was 13, going through what women usually go through when they're in their 50s and 60s or older. And the testosterone has caused some permanent changes in my bone structure, like I have larger shoulders and a wider jaw than most women. But that really isn't the worst part of it. It's caused me to have urinary tract issues, namely dehydration. I'm prone to infection, and I have to use the restroom rather frequently. And this was not disclosed to me, that this was a possibility. I was told by my endocrinologist at 13 that I may experience the side effect of vaginal atrophy, which again is something that women usually go through when they're going naturally through menopause. And I was told that I could take a medication to alleviate it, and that was the route I took, but I wasn't informed that it would only, from the information that I was given, I thought it would only affect that area. But atrophy, when you're taking when you're taking cross-sex hormones, it affects every area in the pelvic region, and that's part of what's caused the urinary tract issues, and it has not gone away after stopping. And I've experienced complications even from the surgery, namely that I had to have skin grafts as part of it, and 2 years after, the grafts started to fail, and I have to wear bandages over my chest daily. I'd stopped doing that only about 3 months after the surgery. Now I'm back to square one, and I have no idea what's going on. I've tried to reach out to my surgeon, to no avail. I was just told to keep bandaging this part of my chest, even though I should have stopped doing that long ago, and to cover it with Vaseline. And his advice actually temporarily gave me the skin infection and made the situation worse. So I learned very quickly that I can't trust these same medical professionals anymore. Gender dysphoria really is a mental health condition, and yet we're treating it with surgeries and physical interventions. There is not a single other mental health condition that we do the same with. We don't tell patients with anorexia that they're fat, that they need liposuction. We don't tell patients, actually, cosmetic surgeons, when a patient with body dysmorphia presents to them, they immediately turn them away because they know it's not ethical to operate on patients who are in so much distress. And yet it's perfectly fine for children who wrongly feel that they're the opposite sex to be mutilated and castrated using some of these treatments are treatments that we use in patients with advanced breast cancer or prostate cancer. Lupron, or puberty blockers, which I was put on, have been used to castrate sex offenders. But we stopped doing this long ago because it was considered too cruel, too dangerous to use in them. If these treatments are too dangerous for use in sex offenders, why are we subjecting children to this? Aside from the physical dangers that this presents to children, children just are not capable of making informed decisions on things like this, no matter how much information you give on it, because they are not physically or cognitively developed enough. They have not lived in this world for long enough. They do not have enough worldly knowledge or experience to be able to consent to something like this. It is never appropriate for use in children. We cannot keep experimenting on children like this. We cannot keep interfering with their natural, healthy development of their bodies and minds. It is never appropriate for children. I feel that in cases of adults who present with this, who have taken other options for treatments like psychotherapy, if those options haven't worked out, and if they're fully informed of how this will affect them and their bodies, then I think we should leave it up to them. But with the current model we have now, and I've spoken to a lot of adults who feel similarly about their transitions, informed consent isn't really possible. Doctors lie to patients, to their families about this. When they told my parents that I was at risk of suicide, they lied. They treat this as really a one-size-fits-all treatment. They don't take into consideration that almost every patient with gender dysphoria has some sort of comorbid condition like depression or anxiety or cluster B personality disorder. Every young person I know who has gender dysphoria, who has a desire to transition, has either one of two things. They either have some sort of familial trauma, like either one of their parents had died or they're in foster care, or they were sexually traumatized. They've been assaulted or they've been subject to childhood abuse. Every single one of them. And yet this is almost never taken into account for these patients. It is such an awful standard of care for such a vulnerable population, and it needs to stop. Thank you.
Welcome to Idaho.
I like it here.
She is a Californian, so I assume she'll be moving here within about 6 months. Chloe, if it's all right with you, we could do a couple questions from the
Yeah.
crowd. Just make sure that when you offer your question, you're loud so that we can hear. We'll do maybe 4 or 5 or whatever Chloe is comfortable with, and then we'll have Bruce Gog up to talk about his legislation. So, Chloe, take it away. Heidi.
Hi, Chloe. Could you just, as we ended on that note, could you tell everyone, as you told last night, how much money have these doctors made, per se, maybe not on you, but in general, how much money do they make on transitioning? And I'm gonna follow that up with, how many death threats have you received?
So I've seen some figures that are like up to about 300,000 on average per patient. Yeah, and you're asking about like, what was the last part of your question?
We talked about death threats.
Yeah,
Share that with me.
yeah. So I mean, ever since I transitioned and even just spoken about my regret, even personally, just to friends, I've received not the nicest reaction at times, but as I've gone public with my story, it's gotten a little bit scarier. I'd say I get a threat of either death or just being physically hurt at least once per week. And I have to fear for my safety. There's things that I feel like I can't do even locally anymore without hiring security.
Thank you, ma'am. And for your trouble, I don't know whether you can go this around, but I'm going to ask anyway. Tell me exactly how much money was dumped into Idaho, out of state, by Idaho Freedom Foundation in 2022?
Yeah, one second, I'll take this one. Hey, I appreciate your attendance here. This is a really important issue. We're going to stay on topic or you will be removed.
Take care of him. Except for maybe one person in this room, I would say, Chloe, thank you for everyone that's here. And not only that, I would suspect that everyone in this room would offer assistance to you if you ever need it.
Thank you all so much just for being here and for listening.
Let's do this. The gentleman in the green hoodie.
Regarding the doctors and all the doctors that you saw before everything started, I think there was mention of one that was against. If there had been more, what do you think this would have done here?
I don't think so. I was referred to multiple endocrinologists, and the first one who I was referred to actually refused to put me on blockers and testosterone because he said that I was too young and that there were some concerns about my brain development. But he was the only doctor really who had that sentiment.
The woman in red.
Thank you, Chloe, for sharing. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that you had gone through a therapist, and the therapist really only offered you and your family one option, and that was to go through transition treatment.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted you to maybe share, like, what would have helped your family to have given other guidance, or do you feel like that your therapist did that because that was what was required for her because of her professional association?
Yeah, so I mean, in the state of California, we have a ban for conversion therapy, and gender identity is included in that. And it's to the extent that for gender dysphoria, you can't suggest any other treatment than transitioning. And I feel like that was in large part why I had so many doctors who were affirmative, and they are trained to be that way.
Senator Herndon.
Yes, thank you, Chloe. Can you explain to us in just a little bit more detail how the consent worked for you to go through these medical treatments in relation to your parents' involvement? And then I want to have you follow that with, how is your relationship with your parents today and with your business?
So my parents were required to sign off on the consent forms, but it was under duress from the doctors. They were concerned for my well-being, and they were told that this was the only means of that I could get better from this condition, which wasn't true, by the way. Ever since I've been off of the hormones, I've just been living in reality. It's been getting better. It's still there, but I've only been getting better. But as for like the informed consent part, I mean, they would have like a list of side effects on all the forums, and like sometimes some of the side effects would be talked about, not really in enough detail. But the thing about that is the side effects listed were rather vague. It wasn't really a comprehensive list. And even if it was, it's hard as somebody who was perfectly healthy before, and even just as somebody who was a kid, to know what it really would mean. And it's not, my hand was not forced in this. I was the one who was pushing for this. And even though my parents did sign off, it was under the pretense that it was for me and that I fully understood what I was doing, and that I thought that it would make me, that I was told that it would make me feel better. But no child can really understand that. As for my relationship with my parents, it was strained over my transition, and so is my relationship with a lot of other members of my family. But as I've been getting healthier, both physically and mentally, and just have been growing, I find that it's been getting a lot better. And it helps them to see that I'm doing what I'm doing now, that I can get up after all that happened.
Two more.
We can do one.
Right here, Rachel.
Thank you so much for being here. You're extremely courageous, and it's really touching to hear your story. My question is, you mentioned your kind of peer pressure. You mentioned your parental involvement and doctor pressure. What your teacher in on this narrative, or were they kind of
So I started transitioning socially towards the end of 7th grade, and then physically towards the end of 8th grade. And it wasn't until high school, until before my freshman year, that I actually like told the school about it, that I had like my name changed in the file and stuff. But I never talked about it with my teachers. And I graduated high school just last year, and the topics of sexuality, gender identity, and things like that never were brought up in class, ever.
So do you feel that any of your peers maybe had the pressure from the teachers, or maybe that kind of conversation?
No, not. I mean, I do live in a fairly conservative area of California, and I feel like that's a big part of it. But it's starting to become more of an issue. When I was in my sophomore year, I started noticing some other girls transitioning into male identity, and this got worse over the years. The girls in my classes kept coming out as boys, or as non-binary, or as otherwise LGBT, and it was exclusively girls. It was never boys. There was a teacher at my school who was a transgender, trans-identifying male, but all the students, it was all girls. And I think it's due to similar circumstances to mine. I never had like any social pressure from anybody in the real world. I mean, when I started transitioning, I was in middle school, and people in middle school just aren't nice. So I actually got kind of a negative reaction at first. But For them, it could be a combination of just having seen other kids in their group do it, as well as being on social media and just hearing about it.
Right there.
So you're an inspiration. How have you dealt with this spiritually, faithfully? I mean, you go through what you've gone through. Amazing recovery. How did you deal with that?
Well, for a while, I really felt like I didn't have anybody. And still, though, I still had dreams of the future of making new friends. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I still don't know what I want to do, but I think that was part of what kept me up. And also just the support from my family. And I mean, there was about a week where there were several weeks where I just couldn't get up out of bed and just stayed in my room all day. But just having my parents checking on me and just bringing me snacks, foods, and just words of support, it really meant a lot to me. And I think that was one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing, keeping me through it.
To what extent do you think public schools alienate driven? It seems to me that the craving for belonging in this country, people are starving for love and attention. Like the school shootings that are happening are another symptom of this. Alienate the kids and come back responsible. And this has to do with just being completely alienated, not belonging to any group. It seems to me that we're struggling with something very basic of just trying to belong to an identity of being a female. And so I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about what you think the root cause.
I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, I think the advent of social media has exacerbated this a lot, but I mean, it's not uncommon to meet a teen or even a younger child who feels like they don't fit in with their peers. And I think a lot of that is really a symptom of the same core issue that these kids don't feel like they belong. They feel like they're not loved or supported by those around them. And I think part of it is parenting. The way that parents take care of their children has changed a lot, and just within the past few decades, parents have gotten a lot busier, and at the end of the day, they're quite tired, and they just basically let the devices their kids have babysit their children. And they're not especially a lot of the older generation, they don't really understand the impact that things like the internet and social media can have on a developing mind. And so they don't really understand the dangers. And these kids often develop internet addictions, porn addictions, addictions to playing video games. And a lot of parents these days don't really discipline their kids, and they don't keep their kids active in things like sports or clubs at school as they used to. And I mean, it's important not only to keep your kid busy and keeping their mind off of things that don't really mean much, but also just to give them that sense of community that they would get from being involved in an extracurricular or in a sport.
Okay, last one, because we got to get to Representative Scott. Representative E. Hart in the back.
Thank you, Chloe. Very inspirational. It takes a lot of courage to do something like this. So my question is, we know that a lot of those who've gone through this transition are detransitioning, but it obviously, as you found out, masturbate, try to suppress you. So is there a connection out there? And is there probably not an organization, but is there a means where this information is being gathered because the amount is pretty important to help you stop this, because we're, as you indicate, we're led to believe. If it's only one-sided, everybody wants to do it the only way to help somebody, and it's funny that the other side of the court is saying that, this is leading to suicide, yet they push you into the very thing, and they say it's leading to suicide. It's such a contradictory term.
Well, for me, the first place I really reached out to was a support group online, the subreddit for detransitioning, r/detrans, and there's like a chat room community around that. There aren't really a lot of official resources collecting information on this, but recently there's been some reports by Reuters on detransitioners, and one of them is observing was on a study that was recently released by my healthcare provider, actually, that was on minors, about 200 girls who had a gender affirming double mastectomy, and they reported that there were only 2 who regretted the study. Now these girls who regretted the operation, and these 2 girls, the criteria for the study was that the surgeries occurred between 2013 and late 2020, and that the girls were minors. And I filled this criteria, but the 2 girls who reported to regret it were about 15 to 16, and they were not the age that I was. So I was not included in the study. And I know about 2 other people who went through the same hospital that I did, went through the same healthcare provider, and they were not included in the study either, even though at least I reported to my surgeon, my gender specialist, and my therapist, and my endocrinologist specifically that I regretted my transition, that I regretted my surgery, and yet I was not included in the study. So there are some mainstream, or at least larger media outlets who are starting to pick this up.
Give a round of applause, folks.
Thank you all for coming today.
Real estate prices are high enough. Stop that. All right. So we want to wrap up in just a few minutes, but there's action that we can take. There's a bill about this in the Idaho legislature. Thank you to Representative Bruce Cogg for running that, and he's going to talk about that today.
I am thankful for all of your questions because I had to recover from bawling sitting in my seat as she told her story. What was going through my mind, and I'll talk about the bill, that's what I'm here for. What was going through my mind is, where were all the adults? Where were they? I hope this legislature and the gentleman on the second floor are the adults to take care of this. We're legislators. We fix things by legislation. That's what we do. Chloe, I got to visit with you a little bit this morning, and your face will be in my mind, and people like you and your courage as I argue this bill on the floor of the House. I will not forget you. Thank you. So we have a House bill number that was announced on the floor this morning. It's House Bill 71, if I heard right from the clerk. Good government throughout Western civilization has a legitimate purpose, and that is to restrain evil, not to get in the middle of our lives, but to restrain evil. Hurting children is evil, and this is an evil process the way it's developed in our country. Even in Europe, they're starting to pull back on this while we're advancing these procedures in America. It has to stop. There needs to be legislation. I brought this bill last year. It went through the House easily on a 55-13 vote. And then there's a story behind it, didn't go through the Senate. This year, I'm assured again, and I believe it this time, that the Senate is going to hear this bill. Senator Lori Den Hartog, give her encouragement. She's going to carry it in the Senate. And the courage we need is very little compared to Chloe. Already I mean, I thought I'd join the legislature to talk about taxes, but here we are. I get the F-bomb phone calls. That's part of the job. I appreciate the encouraging ones. But now when this bill starts up, the shaky voices, angry, threatening, almost insane, full of F-bombs start. So they usually call at night when I'm not there, so I can't talk to them. But that's what I did this last year. It's delete, 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 and they're just all these foul messages. So those are going to come to your senator and to those who are taking point on this. So we need your prayers, those that do pray. Overall, we need the success of this bill. It criminalizes anybody that would do this to children. 10 years in prison. Up to 10 years in prison. Last year, it was up to life in prison. Now, why did we change that? I was encouraged by appellate attorneys who may have to deal with this, that there's a good bill that's coming out of another state. It's in the 11th Circuit, and it is in force, prohibiting these procedures right now. And so we're going to follow that with 10 years prison, up to 10 years in prison. So that's one of the changes to the bill. I think it's well drafted. You'll probably hear otherwise from some other people. I believe that we're going to carry it through Judiciary and Rules Committee. It's been printed there. We have a pretty good committee. I think it'll hit the House floor. I don't know when, but that's going to happen. Now, we also have a fundamental right, according to our Supreme Court, for procreation, to have children. And if it's a fundamental right, that is the highest standard. A parent can't give up that right for their child. They cannot consent to that or should not be allowed to make that decision for their children. Because I'll hear, well, it's up to the parents. They can decide. No, you can't take away your child's right to procreate. You cannot. And that is part of the reason we're taking this bill forward also. So that's just the gist of the bill. I know we're approaching the end of the hour, so I don't know if you want questions. 2 questions.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
How many of these surgeries occur now?
Good question. There's no reporting requirement, so we do not know. We get stories like Chloe's, and we know there's a lot of money to be made on these surgeries. I had one father report to me. He opposed it in a divorced household. His son went through the puberty blockers, even though he opposed it. The wife had custody. And his first bill, and this is last year, was $78,000. So there's big money out there to be made on this. Any other questions? You pick.
Senator Carlson.
Who's paying for these surgeries now in Idaho? Do you know?
I was asked, who's paying for these surgeries now? I do not know. I don't know who's paying for them, but they wouldn't be doing them for free.
We have a question.
It's not a question.
You can do whatever you want in this place. Do
Yes.
you want to come up here?
So I don't know about Idaho. I'm not sure about here, but in my state, gender affirming care, as they call it, is required by law to be covered by insurance companies. And every single part of my transition, save for I think like the bills for like consultations.
All right, let's give President Skog a round of applause. Okay, a couple of housekeeping notes, and then I'll set you free. The Idaho Freedom Foundation has written a very good guide to radical gender theory, the toolkit. Nicholas in the back is holding it up. He's right next to Abe Lincoln, weirdly enough. So if you want, we offer those for free. Take a couple, send them to your friends, send them, read them, pass them around. Thank you for joining us this week. In 2 weeks, we have a Capital Clarity next week. I don't know who's on the schedule, Brian. Anyone?
State Controller Brandon Wolf.
Oh, Brandon Wolf is going to be talking about transparency next week. That's fantastic. In 2 weeks, we're going to have James Lindsay here to talk about cultural Marxism and CRT in schools. I hope you will join us for that. Thank you so much for coming to Capital Clarity. And Chloe, thank you for being here. We appreciate you.